Good morning, and welcome to week 15 on the downhill slide. We're going to finish up the Cold War this week. Now, I have added in more in the way of textbook reading for you. That's something you need to expect when you get to high school, being given larger chunks of material to read and take notes on. I'm going to try to gradually get away the last couple of weeks from any kind of guided reading for you, because you really need to develop the skill of reading and taking your own notes so that you remember what you have read, or you have identified the highlights in what you're reading. For this week up until Thursday, I'm going to give you some guides for your reading, and then I'm going to drop those with Thursday's assignment. And hopefully that won't cause you too much anxiety. You just learn how to deal with that. All right, so we're going to finish up the Cold War first by looking at how China becomes communist, because remember, the Cold War is all about the spread of communism and the conflict. Though it's not an armed direct conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union or the USSR, that it is definitely a conflict, because the United States is following that policy of containment. It does not want to allow communism to spread into other countries. But after the Great Depression, there were some elements of communism that were very attractive to other countries. Now, we've learned through the test of time that communism doesn't work. It works in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. So we're going to look here. China is still a communist country, although there are elements of capitalism within it as well. There isn't really one pure economic system throughout the world. So I want you to first watch this little video about Chinese communism, and then you have a textbook reading link right here. And in that textbook reading link, I've asked you for 2 different sets of questions. Please be sure to number your questions according to how they are numbered here, and the page numbers would help me as well. Okay, so that will deal with China. All right, then still on the Asian continent, we're going to deal with the wars in Korea and Vietnam, because this is spreading further south. These 2 countries, again, does not come to blows between the Soviet Union and the United States directly. However, Russia, the Soviet Union, and China both support the communist side of this conflict, and the United States supports, with troops and with financial aid, the parts of these 2 countries that wanted to remain free and not communist. So you'll look at the Korean War and the Vietnam War as an overview. And then I wanted to show you, this is a very famous little bit of video taken by a CBS reporter on the last few hours in Saigon. The Vietnam War was so controversial in the United States and so very expensive that the government finally decided that enough is enough. We have lost too many American lives, and it is too expensive. We are going to pull our troops out. And of course, the Vietnamese people in the southern part of Vietnam understand that they are going to become communist at that point, and many wanted to leave the country. They did not want to be part of that system. So this is kind of shows the desperation of many of those people trying to get out of Saigon, which is where the last of the American troop flights were leaving from. So if you'll watch both of those, and then again, you have a textbook reading on Korea and Vietnam, and I've asked you to do these questions here. There's one that asks for a diagram, and you can make a diagram if you want to. It's a helpful skill, but I also gave you a simple table to fill in that might be helpful instead. So use either one of those. And if you're counting successes and failures, at the end of the Korean War, Korea to this day remains divided into North Korea and South Korea. North Korea is under the control of a dictator. It's the 3rd generation of that same dictatorship that took over in the 1940s. And if you've heard of him, his name is Kim Jong-il. And it still remains a divided country today. Vietnam, however, is completely communist. All right. Next, we'll look at just in general how the rest of the world sort of gets divided up. One of the closest to home conflicts would have been the crisis that was in Cuba. Cuba is just off the coast of Florida. It's not very far at all. And Cuba, poor little Cuba, kind of gets sandwiched between the United States and the Soviet Union. And we'll learn a little bit about the Cuban Missile Crisis. But this video will talk about how the world was sort of divided up, and it's got a great map that goes with it. And these non-allied countries that this map is going to show, the countries that have not chosen to ally themselves with either the United States or the Soviet Union, that would have been a very precarious position because you're talking about two very powerful countries. And sometimes it's very hard to maintain your neutrality. And that's, that if you're in Africa where there are a lot of other neutral countries or non-aligned countries, it might be a little easier than if you're Greece right here. Okay. All right. So do the reading for that. And then you've got a separate assignment, although the reading and the questions covers this, you've got a separate assignment on the Cuban Missile Crisis because this brought us to the brink of World War III. Fortunately, both leaders came to a compromise that allowed both of them to step back without really losing face or giving in to the other side. Fortunately for the world, because at this time our weapons are so powerful, had this come to World War III, we probably would have pretty much killed off the earth at that point. Kind of sad, depressing thought. If you have maybe grandparents who were alive in the 1960s who would have maybe they remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. So if you get a chance, talk to them about it. And then we're going to look at the beginnings of this thaw of the Cold War, which is going to start to occur in the 1980s. It doesn't really run its course until the early 1990s. But I want you to look at what was happening in the Soviet Union. You got perestroika and glasnost. And for this, let's see, this was so I'm sorry, you've got a reading. Let me back up. Let me back up to the other page because I don't want to skip that here. Make that go away. Here we go. All right, so make sure this is the one where I started doing reading with no questions to it, but it will help your understanding. And I am going to pull some test questions from the textbook readings, so make sure that you read that. So do the Cold War thaws textbook reading, and then it's going to give you more information on perestroika and glasnost. And this is just in the 1980s, the Soviet Union had a leader by the name of Mikhail Gorbachev, and Gorbachev understood that communism was not a way to have a country that was competitive with the rest of the world. Communism doesn't encourage competition, and competition is what tends to make products better. Because if I can make to use the old comparison, if I can make a better mousetrap than you can, then I'm going to be the one who profits, and I'm going to work hard because I can profit. But in communism, nobody profits in theory. Okay, it's all communally owned. So therefore, people who work hard don't get rewarded. So there's really no incentive to work hard. And at this time, Russia has sort of figured that out. So these are both steps to relax the communism rule in the Soviet Union. Now, since then, in the 20, 25, 30 years since then, it has sort of gone back and forth. It has had some leaders who are more stringent towards communism and they believe more in communism, and others who are more liberal. But this represents the 80s version of, who was strong and who was not, and who wanted to give people more freedom. And the United States was very much in favor and supportive of the Soviet Union when they were doing these actions. And then we get to the actual end of the Cold War. It's not just one event that causes the end of the Cold War, but it's basically the internal collapse of Russia back into, or from the Soviet Union back into Russia. Those little fringe countries, and you can sort of see it, sort of see it on this map along the edges here, where communism after World War II just sort of overwhelmed those countries. Those countries wanted their identity back, and they were willing to fight for it. At this time, Russia, in spite of having lots of resources, really wasn't well equipped to handle a war on several of its fronts within its own country. So it let some of those countries go and go back to the countries that they were. And this is still, if you look at the conflicts today between the Ukraine and Russia, this is still the same thing that is happening. Only here, Russia has decided they want the Ukraine back. So this is not a new conflict with them. This is actually a 70 to 80-year-old conflict that is going on. So read the Actively Learn page to sum up the end of the Cold War. I didn't put anything specific in here other than the reading on the fall of the Berlin Wall. That's considered by many to be a very, very significant event in the end of the Cold War. So if you want to look that up, it's got some pretty good footage online of the wall that was representative of the Iron Curtain coming down in Germany. So that might be worth looking at. All right. And then you are ready to take the test on Friday. Now, again, I have encouraged you. You're welcome to have your notes out, to have your tabs open. There is a time limit on this test because it's not really designed to let you look up every little piece of information. At this point, we're kind of testing, do you know it? What did you learn? Hopefully that at least the majority of that knowledge is still rolling around in your brain and you're ready to do that. There are 2 attempts set up for this. I would have to there's a part that I have to grade. So, if you're concerned about your grade and you want to know what your grade is, email me and I'll get that test graded for you, perhaps a little more quickly than I normally do. Normally I wait. Well, I would be grading it on Monday anyway, because this occurs on Friday. So you would know by the following Monday whether what kind of grade you had on that. So good luck. Have a great week.